So we're going to be talking about a little bit of alignment. This is going to be a full race suspension with fully adjustable GT3 lower control arms, bump steer, tie rod arms, which are required when you go to a really low setting. This vehicle is running a Olin road and track suspension. And then we're going to go down to the front and also talk about caster. All right, so now it's going to be more in depth. So what we're going to be showing you guys is there's a lot of questions about alignment, and we seem like we're getting all the cars that are pretty much out of alignment. And I think it has to do with a lot of shops that possibly do these alignments. They don't have the specs, or they don't have full race alignment systems. We do everything manually, so we use a GT1 race car alignment system, so we're able to set it up, do all the measurements, and be able to dial it in perfectly. So there's no indicator anywhere or computer or somewhere where if your wheel is bent and you have an attachment on the wheel that potentially it might be off, and then when it's telling you a certain reading, that reading may go to green or red, but really it's actually off. So that's a problem with some of the really highly sophisticated machines. Obviously this takes like 5 times longer to do, but it's perfect. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk about these bump steer toe adjustment arms. So most of the places that align these vehicles, what they'll do is when you lower it, this one has a Olin coilover system, which is a road and track version. And when they typically lower it, it'll kick the wheel back, so your caster will actually shift, because when you lower it, it shifts and brings in the camber. Anytime your caster is affected, or it affects camber, and anytime your camber is affected, it affects caster. So to correct it, you have to use this bump steer kit right here, which is for full adjustability. And we actually put a lock here because they're normally eccentric bolts with a control arm, and that control arm becomes out of adjustment. This car came in out of adjustment, so it originally came from a Porsche dealer. So I don't know, at the time maybe they installed it, who knows, somebody else might have been in the suspension and they did some work. So I can't blame anybody, and I try not to because I don't know who else worked on it. But I know when it came here, the suspension toe in the back, so if we're looking at a car from the back, toe was out. So anytime the wheel is turned out on both wheels, that's called toe out. Toe in is when both of the wheels are in. So we adjust and fine adjust. Obviously this has to be perfectly straight on both ends. You can't have it this way. We've seen them cause wear and damage and noise. So we want to adjust them like that, lock them in, and then we tighten everything after we do our full adjustment. Now on the lower control arms, the issue with this is a GT3 style, which is made by Tarrant, and there's shims that we installed. So what we did was we did the eccentric adjustment bolt here, and we brought in the camber, because camber was like 4.2 negative, which is too high. We're at about 3.5 right now, 3.6. And so we adjusted this, and we brought the toe, and we also shifted the caster forward. So we made the caster more positive in the back, because we actually have adjustments for that. Because anytime that will distort your where the wheel, the center of the wheel, and pretty much it's going to mess up the whole geometry of the suspension if you don't shift it. And that's normally what happens. And I would get into it more in depth, but there's a lot of information about it, so we're going to skip that for now. But anyways, you want to shift it forward. If you lower the car enough where the suspension, as you lower it, does this. It brings the wheel in, and when it does that, it rolls it. So that's why your toe, when you start adjusting it to put it back, you actually never shift the caster back unless you use a proper GT3 lower control arm. So both of them have been installed. So what we do is we first always align the back. And I guarantee if this car is taken back to the dealer or whoever had it last, their alignment specs are going to say that it's wrong, because they're obviously using something that's either they're not measuring correctly or setting it up right. Obviously, the alignment machine is as good as the operator. Ours is manual, so it's all geometry calculations. We shoot lasers. It's a 3D system that we run, and that's what's used on the race cars. All right, let's walk over to the front. All right, on the front, somebody installed these Elephant Racing lower control arms that were originally installed by, I'm not sure who the shop was, I believe the dealer. And they were installed, it seems like, all right, I guess. The problem was, they had a positive caster on the left, which was like positive by almost 4 degrees versus 3 degrees off on the right. That's way too much. You don't want to do that, not for the track. So one was tilted back, the other one was tilted forward. So what we did is we fixed the caster, because this is a track only vehicle. But the issue is when you run the Elephant stuff, they're great suspensions. It kind of kicks the wheel because it gives you a better, wider track. So you have to do adjustments at the top. But the problem is you run out of adjustment because there's slots on top of the frame. And then you end up with 4.3 negative camber, which is way too much. And in this situation, that's what the car had. Another issue, it rubbed all here and it rubbed all on the liners because they had their caster set up too forward, and that was causing a bunch of issues. So we fixed that by shifting it slightly back. So we're still around spec, a little bit less, because it's really impossible to dial it in at spec after you lower the car. Unless you remove the axles and you turn it into a real GT3 car, you can't do exactly how it was when it was from the factory, because now your cambers are like this instead of 2 degrees what they normally are. They're at 3.5 now, 3.6. These are less. These are 3.5 on each side. They were at 4.2. So the adjustments, why these are longer, you can actually adjust them here instead of having the shim, but the issue, these are a little bit longer than stock. Great for like 997s, the RS cars, the ones with the fender liner, the one that have a extended fender, because then you can kind of push out your track on the vehicle. But not so good on like the 996s, because then you have to notch the top towers in order to shift your camber back to positive, because it's going to become too negative. So I will show you guys that. So this is all adjusted, and we're running 0 toe. That's what the customer wanted. We could kick the toe out and we can run slight positive toe, but in this situation, we're gonna run 0 toe because that's what the customer originally wanted. And it came in with negative toe of 7 millimeters originally. So we don't know if maybe something was hit on the track, but I would say the adjustment was off. With the Elephant stuff, you have to remove this arm because they have set screws in order to rotate it. These are actually really nice because you can rotate and you can position your camber or caster. It'll actually affect the camber, but you can position it either negative or positive just by rotating these. The problem is there's a set screw here and one on the inside that you have to remove to undo, then put it back together. It's a lot of work to adjust it. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of shops are not really willing to put in the time to do it correctly because it could take you like all day. Sometimes, like we're at a day and a half right now because everything was so off. So be careful where you take it. When you have a true alignment machine, like a Hunter, you can't really dial these in like that. You have to have the race alignment set up. You know, you have to have all your turntables. You have to have everything that you normally would do a race car, because Hunter alignment machines are great. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're made for stock vehicles. They're made for vehicles sometimes that don't even have caster adjustment. Although you can do it on them, but we haven't had anybody from the dealers, any of them, even some BMWs, Mercedes, that came in that were right. Guys that lower their cars, they're just off completely. All right, enough with that. I'm gonna lower and show you guys the top areas that I'm talking about where you have to slot them. Okay, so this right here is a 3D laser. So when it shoots a beam, this is fully set up when the car is fully on these tables and it's resting so they can float. These tables float. So when we shoot it, we can actually shoot it down the middle, and we can shoot all three, and we can measure, we can see if the car has a bent suspension or the whole frame is twisted. So all this is set up prior to doing alignment. So unless your lasers are off, which we calibrate them every second alignment that we do, and when these lasers are straight, we measure everything off the wheels, and this is fully square, so it's impossible for it to be off unless you have measuring issues that you're really not familiar with how to calculate. So once this is measured, we check it 3 times. So we'll run, see, we even have these levels that we make sure the tables are always centered and always leveled because they're fully adjustable. So this setup is the way that we actually align these cars. So now we're going to turn it off and then go to the front, and I'll show you guys the adjustments that we do for the camber. Okay, so there's a couple ways of actually adjusting your camber. Remember, camber always affects caster. So Porsche slots these right here where the bolts are. This is a turret upper mount. So what you do is you shift to the outermost portion of the frame will give you a more positive camber. If you go in, it's going to give you negative. The problem is this setup, it kind of gets out of adjustment real fast. So what you do is we have to buy adjustable upper mounts, and the mounts have slots in them, and we can actually shift the mount internally and shift where we want. Obviously, if we go too high right here, we're gonna rub inside the fender, and we don't want that. So we wanna be within around, on the GT3RS cars that we do, like a couple that we've done recently, we normally set those up around 3.6 negative camber. And we normally do a toe out of 0.5 mil. And same thing on that side. So there's two ways of doing it. The slots here that Porsche makes, some guys will slot them more, give you more adjustment, which is fine. It's not gonna really hurt anything. But you could get the mounts that will move them out further so you can have less of this. So the toe is more, the camber is more positive. Because if you lower it to this low ride height, which is, this car really sits low, your camber is going to be 4.5 degrees if you don't do any adjustments. That's way too high. It's not going to handle well. So that is it for the alignment, guys. And if you got any questions, comment below. We'll try to respond. If we can't, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Have a nice day.